What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Welcome back to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie, where we believe an experience becomes truth. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and joining me now in studio, your other host and world-renowned psychic, Eddie Connor.
Hi, everyone. Tony, guess who we have in the house with us today?
Who is that?
We have UBN radio host and acclaimed astrologer Rachel Lang.
Love Rachel.
I do too, but first, a quick word from our sponsors at Adventures Unlimited Press. You want to take your mind on a literary journey by skipping right on over to adventuresunlimitedpress.com and purchase books from many of the famed experts featured right here on Truth Be Told. In today's show, we're delving into the world of investigative journalism. And in the second hour, we're covering the unique idea of pre-birth experiences.
That's going to be good. Well, you may know our first guest in studio. Well, she's not in studio, but she's going to be calling in. And you might know her from the History Channel's UFO Files or from the Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie.
That's right. Linda Moulton Howe is also an acclaimed TV producer with National Emmy award-winning documentaries such as Poison in the Wind and A Sun-Kissed Poison, where she compares the overwhelming smog pollution of Los Angeles and Denver, Colorado. She's also received honors as a medical producer in Boston's WCVB station. She's received the Excellence Peabody Award there, and we know she's got tons more groundbreaking documentaries under her belt to share with us right here on Truth Be Told. So please, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and welcome Linda Moulton Howe.
Welcome, Linda.
Well, thank you very much for having me today on your show.
We are so excited and honored. You're one of those A-list gets that we've been wanting to get for a long time, so we're so excited. And if my voice cracks, it's because I'm a little nervous because I love you so much.
And you're very excited.
Yes. All right, so we're going to get started with our show today. Because this is the first time you've been on our show, we'd like to know a little bit more how you got started in this field, because it's a very interesting field for anybody to look into.
Well, I'm glad that you asked, because I did my graduate work, have a master's degree in communication from Stanford University up the coast from you in Palo Alto, California. And during those 2 years where I was the only female in a class of 27 guys, we made documentary films as part of our Stanford University challenge to get our master's degree. And my focus was in doing a documentary with the Stanford Medical Center on a project that went on for 19 years after I graduated from Stanford in 1968. And I would get letters periodically thanking me for doing this documentary work with the medical center. And I did my master's film with the Stanford Linear Accelerator. It's fascinating looking back that when I graduated in 68, that computers were basically rudimentary, and it was while I was at Stanford that the Stanford Linear Accelerator, which is focusing on bombardment of atomic particles and trying to find various relationships that they can extrapolate up to this matter world that we're in. And they were just starting, trying to get computers to do all of the labor of all of those bombardment images, and that's what I did my master's work on.
Wow.
And
that's incredible.
Yeah, and from that point on, to this very day, this very hour, and this minute, talking to you, my beat as an investigative reporter and a documentary producer, writer, director, editor, and reporter has always been, has never changed, science, medicine, the environment. It is in those three contexts that in 1979, in the summer, I was working on a documentary at the CBS station in Denver where I was director of special projects. And my job was to produce 2 or 3 documentaries a year, do news segments, and do live studio programs on sort of major issues that would affect Colorado and the nation and the relationship between the two. And so what surfaced in the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News and the TV stations and radio were reports, and the word again was very prominent, the unusual bloodless deaths of animals throughout Colorado in which there were no tracks. And I remember hearing that and thinking, wow, I've got to get to the bottom of this. And in September of 1979, I began my very first phone calls, and the first sheriff that I went up to see without a TV crew wanted to get background, wanted to hear what a man who had been a sheriff for over 20 years in Logan County, Colorado, had done some of the most detailed and most numerous investigations in the late 60s to the 70s when he was sheriff. And his name was Tex Graves. A big man.
That's a great name.
That is a great name.
That sounds like a TV show.
It absolutely is perfect for him. He's tall, he was big, he was the kind of sheriff that you would want up in Sterling, Colorado, where most of the country is animals and people were pocketed in little rural areas. So big sky with lots of room for anything to come and go in those pastures. And Tex looked at me after he had shown me a bunch of Polaroids that he had taken at 266, I think, they were the number of the photos, and they were constituted like 70 or 80 mutilation sites.
Wow.
And he looked at me and he said, let me save you some time. The perpetrators of these animal mutilations are creatures from outer space.
Wow. Oh, that gave me chills.
I know.
No.
Direct quote.
Wow.
Absolutely direct quote.
Wow.
And I think just as you all had a reaction back then in September of 79, it felt, I literally remember the physical impact, a feeling like when I was a kid and my dad had an electric fence around the garden and we would touch it just to experiment.
Yeah, as my brother
It had
made me
that
do. Yeah.
tingling feeling, and it was as if, and a lot of times you look back, you don't always know precisely when you go through Alice in Wonderland mirrors, but that was the beginning of the major one for me, because when I was a kid growing up, the subject that I loved the most was astronomy. I was always begging my dad to get a telescope. I started the Boise Astronomical Society with 6 guys and me. We built a telescope. We went out on a farm. We spent endless nights doing night watches, looking for meteors, all sorts of things. And that was my first love. And therefore, I had grown up and gone to college and gotten married and was working in Denver, Colorado as director of special projects with a telescope at home, with this great love of the sky. Not a single nervous night did I ever spend anywhere until I left Sheriff Tex Graves' place and I got in my car with a 2.5-hour drive in front of me at twilight.
Oh.
And it's like, yeah. And as I got in the car, I remember as if it happened a second ago. The door was still, I had my left arm on the door, and I found myself looking up at the twilight sky, and I felt nervous.
Like you were being watched.
Right.
And it was this transition through, when they talk about paradigm shifts, that's what they're talking about, that you live life and you're in XYZ parameters, and suddenly something happens that completely throws you past that one, and now you're in a new landscape with a new XYZ WQQ, and that's when I got in my car and I drove home. And it was the beginning of what turned out to be 9 months, 18 hours a day. There was not a break. I told my husband that I was determined to get to the bottom of and to answer what became for me the documentary that a lot of people have seen and heard about called A Strange Harvest.
Yes.
And I called it a strange harvest because as each day and week went forward, the crew and I got in a station TV. It was one of those wagons that the station had, and we traveled with our gear, and we were on the road for almost a month, the three of us, with me trying, just like an ethnographic film. Every 24 hours, I had no idea what we were going to be doing the next 24 hours until we got into it. So we were moving from reference point to reference point, and back then, people forget, there's no internet, there's no computers,
Right.
there's
There's
no
no cell
faxes.
phones.
Right. Yeah.
We had only payphones.
Wow.
When you were out, you had payphones. That is it. And you would go from one payphone to another payphone in a little town trying to get a hold of ranchers, sheriffs, reporters, whoever it was that you were referenced at the last location. And you're literally moving in currency, in the present, from one story to another, constantly moving, trying to go forward. And after a while, when it became very clear after umpteen interviews where ranchers told me only off the record they would not stand in front of the TV camera about the night that they saw a beam of light come down in a pasture from something in the sky. They had seen an animal rise in a beam of light, or they had seen an animal lowered in a beam of light, and none of these people went to look at where the animal or the pasture was at night. They all waited for the daylight because they admitted it. We were afraid. And then they would find a classic mutilated animal. And for people who might not have been exposed to the worldwide phenomena of animal mutilations that have been going on this planet since at least the beginning of the 20th century, as far as I know, beginning in Australia, every continent, every hemisphere, thousands and thousands of animals, and they range. What people hear about are cattle and horses, but it's every domestic animal that you can think of, whether it is pigs, sheep, goats, rabbits, even to wild game. U.S. Forest Service person showed me a file that they had in Denver, and here were deer, here were elk, and they had the same, and here is now the classic excision, the pattern of what is taken from the animals' bodies. If they are lying on their right side, it's always the sky-facing side where the excisions are. And so a left ear, usually with a circle at the on the surface of the skull, no blood, no fluid, just a perfect circle that can be the size of a quarter, the size of a 50-cent piece, or 3 inches across. And then to the eye, the eyeball is completely removed, often in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, a 3-inch diameter, I'm going to say high deep around the eye, which is very thin. But everything in that 3-inch circle around the eye is removed to the bone. It's very unusual when you see it and extremely pristine. We're not talking about anything fluid or gory. It's very pristine. And then you get to the jaw, mouth area, almost 95% of cases, the tongue is removed in a vertical cut deep in the throat, and the entire tongue is gone. The jaw flesh can be removed from the half of the jaw, both sides, up and lower part of the jaw, like a circle around both upper and lower jaw. And there is nothing on the bone in the classic cases, meaning veterinarians will tell you that to get all of the cartilage and the muscle and the tissue off of, let's say, jaw bones, you really have to boil them.
Oh, yeah.
It is okay, so imagine what ranchers, sheriffs, people coming to investigate these animals, and they're looking at absolutely clean jawbone in an animal that looks like it could get up and walk away because the rest of the body is fresh except for excisions. But this is sort of what always stunned everybody. How could anything get off everything and leave the bone absolutely white as snow and completely clean. This is the classic removal in the jaws. And then as you drop down, male or female, the male usually would be an oval where the penis had been, or the testicles, or a combination of a larger oval. Udders, an entire udder will be removed, but we're talking about hide deep most of the time only, not penetrating into the muscle tissue. And in many cases, it could be half of an udder or just the 4 teeth into the udder that have been removed in such precision that upon examination, several veterinarians have said whatever did this had to cauterize as they removed the teeth. And then, again, just like the tongue removed, at least 90% of the animals, the rectal area is gone, male or female, and in the female, the rectal vaginal area can be one hole penetrating the body. But please do not think of anything fluid. These are all usually quite dry and not blood at all. And the ones that I've seen, the thing that hit me first is how pristine and no tracks around these animals. And I'll share with you the most stunning series of photos that Sheriff Tex Graves showed me on that very first trip, because it set the tone for my being, I guess, open-minded to consider what he said the perpetrators were extraterrestrial or creatures from outer space. And it was a bull, estimate weight 1,700 pounds, black. It was up in the Sterling Logan area, and for people who know about ranches in the West, they know that if it is summer, that the ground will become so parched that there really is not grass. It is like face powder. It's really dust. And these dusty fields, nobody, not rabbits, not people, can walk on that face powder dust without leaving a track. So, so now you have Sheriff Tex Graves with a deputy, and he told me the two of us saw this big animal, and we could see it is lying in this dusty, powdery land. And we said to each other, let's not walk right up to it. Let's get up about 12 feet. I want to walk around, take pictures, so that we can look for any tracks, but we're not seeing tracks, which is what stunned them. So he said they did their 12 feet out perimeter around this body. No tracks. And in the photos that he was showing me, the 2 front hooves and the 2 back hooves were so perfectly joined together, it was as if something had placed the hoof on the bottom and the hoof on the top and glued them. It was perfection in the way the legs and the hooves were in the photo. And on the ground, in this powdery dust, it was so clear you could not see any line of disturbance. For people who are farmers or ranchers, they know about death struggles in most animals when they are dying.
Right.
And you will see what are called death struggles in ground. It's very, very common. Here, you have a 1,700-pound animal on its right side with its legs and hooves perfectly together. There is absolutely no sign of anything in the powdery dust. And the head of this animal hung down 8 inches in a hole.
In a hole?
In a hole. And, of course, I said to the sheriff, what happened here? And he said, well, that's what the deputy and I said to each other. What in the world happened here? Because that head, there was an ear missing, eye missing, tongue, jaw flesh, genitals removed, and rectum cord out in this animal in which there's not one sign of any struggle, no tracks, no blood. Everything is absolutely perfectly dry, and this head is down, meaning it's attached to the body. See the animal lying flat on the ground, but that there's an 8-inch hole, so the head is falling with the neck into this hole, sort of. And he said the only thing, Linda, that we could conclude is that whatever did this had the ability to paralyze this animal on the ground and either on purpose left its head to be movable, or it was an error. But whatever happened, the animal could not move any part of its body but its head, and in its agony dug the hole.
Oh my God.
Wow, that is crazy.
Those are data points in this phenomena that when people ask me, how did I ever come to investigate extraterrestrial biological entities, government policies of denial, animal mutilations, human abductions, crop formations, and the list goes on, it is because I wanted to get to the bottom of how, who, why could do this, not only to animals in Colorado, but it was very clear after I finished doing A Strange Harvest, and it was broadcast in a 90-minute special in the night on May 25th, 1980, and it was like a bomb went off, literally.
Yeah.
And again, remember, we only could communicate with ourselves in the world through telephone or hard-written letters to the U.S. mail. Just remember that.
Yeah, or smoke signals.
Those two options, that's what existed.
Yeah.
And that after that broadcast that night, when I got to the office the next morning, the switchboard said, Linda, we can't keep up with the phone calls. They started dragging big gray bags of mail. I have no idea. We lost count. I mean, it was way over 1,000 hard typed or written letters. And it was coming not just from the United States. I was getting mail back in the early 1980 after the May 25th broadcast from people that were in other countries. And all of the letters were saying, I've never told anyone this before, but and then there were amazing mutilation stories, beams coming from the sky stories, human abduction, missing time stories, and the most amazing and wonderful thing was how many people were making illustrations of the very strange things that they had seen and never told anyone. And it was like, once I had done that television program, it gave people permission who had been bottled up for years to communicate. And where some people today, if they only knew how valuable it is when a reporter can put something on a broadcast, whether it is radio like now, whether it is television, whether it is the web, whether it is a book, that what you do if you're trying to just report facts, and that is the only priority I have ever had in my entire professional life, that when you're just trying to report facts, people respond and resonate, and then they feel like they are having permission to tell what it is that they have experienced. And all of those stories began to add up to more. We ended up doing updates, and eventually Home Box Office got in touch with me. They wanted to see my documentary, A Strange Harvest, and they did. And they contracted with me in March of 1983. It was on the spring equinox. And I was in New York City signing a contract to do an hour that they wanted me to do going beyond A Strange Harvest that would be called UFOs, the ET Factor. And by then, I had done, the broadcast had been in 1980. Now it's 3 years later in 1983 that I'm signing the contract. And we were all excited about the script that I had done a preliminary script based on, so much new material that had come my way after I had done A Strange Harvest. And the head of the documentary unit at HBO in New York was Gene Abinader, and we were going full tilt. I had all kinds of things lined up from New York on to start investigating, and one of them was set up for me, meaning I am the TV producer, writer, director, editor, and I had a dinner meeting with he was an attorney in New York, and he was the attorney who represented in the 1970s, soon after the very first time that the United States of America had a Freedom of Information Act passed, which was around 1976, 77, right in there.
Wow.
And this attorney was approached by a group led by a police officer. They had all kinds of professional people in it, again, in the Connecticut, New York, New Jersey area. And they called themselves Citizens Against UFO Secrecy. And other people know it by the acronym CAUSE.
Yeah.
And they hired Peter Gersten, the New York attorney, to represent Citizens Against UFO Secrecy in Freedom of Information requests to every intelligence agency, the Department of Defense, Wright-Patterson, China Lake, every place they had him file Freedom of Information Act requests. So they were the very first requests having to do with information about unidentified flying objects. And here is how Peter Gersten got to the Supreme Court with that work. He would get a letter back from a FOIA officer at the Central Intelligence Agency saying, we don't have any files, but we're aware that the National Security Agency has 119. So he would file to the NSA with the CIA letter, and the NSA would file back and say, the CIA must be mistaken, but we know that the National Reconnaissance Organization has 15. And he ended up getting a whole bunch of replies to his Freedom of Information Act requests that were fingering other agencies having files about UFOs, and he took all of that all the way to the Supreme Court, and I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that the headlines in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, all over, were in January of 1980, and this made headlines because
I remember this.
When they did the appeal, it was in camera, meaning all of the intel agencies that had been called to reveal these files had lawyers who said that they couldn't reveal any of these files that were fingered in each of these correspondences because they affected national security. Oh. And this was one of those releases in which what was released was almost all blacked out on all pages, but Peter Gersten and Citizens Against UFO Secrecy could rightfully stand and say, we have just proved that the intelligence agencies and the military agencies of the United States are withholding files about UFOs. Wow. And that was the guy that I started working with on my HBO documentary, and for probably several of your listeners may have heard about that when I went to Kirtland Air Force Base soon after signing the contract with HBO in New York, I thought that I was going to get some names and addresses of some ranchers up in Ellsworth, near the Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota, where allegedly a literal craft had come down on the base or near the base. Beings not from here had come out. A U.S. Air Force security guard with Ellsworth Air Force Base pulled a gun. A green beam came from the craft on the ground and evaporated the gun in the security guard's hand, leaving minor burns on the surface of the hand. And as one man told me, that is a technology that our government wants.
Oh, of course.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
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 That is the bottom line insight now over all these years, that I have talked with so many people who have worked for so many different aspects of agencies or military, many of them seeking me out before either they died or they were sick and were afraid they were going to die.
Yes.
And what is, I think, fundamental, and I bet you all and anybody listening can relate to this.
And speaking of the list, really quick, Linda, we have to do a quick break. Our sponsors are AdventureSunlimitedPress.com. You're listening to Truth Be Told with
Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor.
And I'm Rachel Lang.
And we have the extraordinary, exceptional, phenomenal Linda Moulton Howe here with us. She's an acclaimed TV producer with National Emmy Award-winning documentaries such as Poison in the Wind and The Sun-Kissed Poison. Every one of us are sitting here with our mouths open and goosebumps on our necks and our arms. And we just had to do a break. So everybody, if you're just tuning in, if you're just finding out about Linda right now through Tony's fan base, keep listening. And then we're going to ask you, before we have to let you go, we want to ask you about the Earthfiles, but please keep telling us. Yeah. So the green light comes out, it hits the guy's gun, it evaporates, and of course our government's like, well, screw the people of the United States, let's go get that technology.
That's all they focused on.
Yes, throughout all of this, one of the big ironies is that our government became extremely and vividly aware during World War II that we were dealing with technologies in the air, on the ground, underwater, that could not be terrestrial. And in fact, when you go back even into Franklin Delano Roosevelt, talking with the Secretary of War, which is what it was called then, George Marshall, and they talked about celestial, that's the word in these government documents, celestial craft, celestial beings. That was going back. So there was awareness. Policies of strict denial were put in place. Apparently, this is what I've been told, Prime Minister Churchill, talking with Dwight D. Eisenhower when he was general before he became American president, and that, of course, was under the administration of Harry S. Truman, that they all agreed that they were dealing with something in the extraterrestrial category. They wanted the technology, and they agreed among themselves that for 2 generations they would keep all information from the public and the media, and this is a phrase that's very important, it's in documents, at all costs. At all costs. At a government level means they can do just about anything to anyone because it becomes formalized as an executive order, and that's what I understand is that Truman signed and dated a classified executive order in 1947 placing every single thing that they were gathering about extraterrestrial biological entities and their technologies under such strict code of denial that people could end up going to prison, losing pensions, families would lose everything if anybody spoke, and that is why there is this bizarre disconnect between what is really happening on this planet and the concocted world that we have had since at least World War II, and perhaps going back to Mesopotamia if you really, really want to go to a bigger box.
Yeah.
But just staying with World War II. And so now, in that context, living on a planet that is concocted in terms of policies about what our evolutionary background is, that we have been living with this mythology that we are alone in the universe, impossible to begin with, but that has been a consensus, quote-unquote, superimposed on the human family, and it's completely incorrect. But everybody has bought into it because governments are the ones that set the tone and the policy of what people believe. That is generally true.
Brainwashing.
Yeah.
Right.
And so when I sat one time across from a man who had contacted me through an intermediary, and he was dying. This was a man who was really sick and dying. And he had, I believe he had read my first book, An Alien Harvest. I've done 4 large books and several documentaries, and he had read An Alien Harvest, and he wanted to meet me. And he said, Linda, it is all so strange and so bizarre that none of us who have worked in it, meaning up close and personal, and have had access to files, ever want to go home and tell our wife and our children.
Oh,
and I
because
yeah,
it's
and
so
I remember sitting there looking at his eyes, and his eyes began to tear up.
Yeah.
And I thought, humans by nature, if you're normal, want to share something so fundamental that we're not alone in the universe and that non-humans are interacting with this planet, and that when you know firsthand and you are ordered with punishment severe, that you are never to tell anyone, that your family is never to know, no one is to know. You are to go to your grave.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody now listening, you can, in your mind, you can go inside yourself and realize that what you would be feeling under that kind of a straitjacket would be anger.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, rage.
Oh,
Yeah.
completely.
And then you begin to understand what has fueled the people who have come to some of us, either at the ends of their lives or however they've done it. And the one common denominator constantly is anger. Anger that they went into the military or intelligence or whatever the work was with the idea that they were true patriotic Americans doing work for the United States family.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Or even the world, depending upon their job.
Yeah.
To find that every single thing that they were working on, they could not talk about, that they knew that they were being exposed to information about technologies that were vastly beyond terrestrial, and that they were called in their work extraterrestrial biological entities with extraterrestrial technology that has self-activating software, and that they knew that our government was working overtime to get any and all extraterrestrial technology into American corporations so they would be patented and kept in terrestrial terms out of the hands of our perceived Earth enemies.
Wow.
And that is exactly what the book, The Day After Roswell, by Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, who died in 1998, only a few months after the 50th anniversary of, it was July 4th, 1997, that we all met in Roswell, and I met him for the first time, and he had this book coming out then, The Day After Roswell, based on his first-hand experiences in the Pentagon, in which General Arthur Trudeau, the very first head of the United States Army Research and Development, hand-picked by then President Eisenhower, because those two men knew each other in World War II, and they trusted each other. They were both Army. General Trudeau had a Ph.D. General Eisenhower, now President, trusts General Arthur Trudeau. And he says to General Trudeau, this is the assignment. We've got to get this technology that we are retrieving from these celestial or extraterrestrial craft into the American patented system. And because he didn't trust the CIA, he didn't trust the other military bases, he wanted General Arthur Trudeau to do this. And who does Trudeau reach out? A guy he trusted during World War II. It was in the Italy theater, and that was Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso. He was Italian. So Corso meets with General Arthur Trudeau in the Pentagon, and he said there were 2 file cabinets with drawers, and inside were extraterrestrial technologies, and he describes them and goes into them in the book. And it is absolutely amazing because Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso had the job of physically hand-carrying to one person that would be in Corning Glass or Arco or Boeing or whatever the corporation company was, that General Arthur Trudeau would have made the contact. This would have been classified to the highest. It would have been impressed upon the corporate contact. This is not where a company, that's why people say, well, how could companies have extraterrestrial technology and not know it? Because the technology is incapable of being applied to anything. It can be handed to one person who is now in agreement with the sources from the Pentagon, we're going to go after this. It is classified. They would know exactly who physically received the technology, and those people are going to go to their grave and not talk. And you can see why, because their names, addresses, phone numbers would be associated with each piece of technology that was hand carried by Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso. That alone was great control then. So now it's 2015. We're in July.
Yep.
It's been a lot of decades. Today, I can say to you with great confidence, we're not alone in this universe, and people in this government and the UK government and Australia and Canada and New Zealand, the World War II allies, have known for a very long time. They all got on board a political square that, to quote-unquote keep the world from falling apart, that they would have these strict policies of denial while they went and retrieved bodies and retrieved technologies and built this huge black world on extraterrestrial technology with all kinds of black diverted monies from who knows where to keep all of this going. And in the beginning, one man told me a few years ago, he said, in the beginning, Linda, they really did think they were super patriots. Their attitude was they were saving the world.
Yeah.
And that they were saving the world with a race for humans, Homo sapiens sapien, even if we were made by extraterrestrials, that we were going to be able to back engineer. Our physicists were going to work 20 hours a day. We were going to come up to par. We were going to be able, if necessary, to deal with something from outer space that was mutilating our animals, abducting humans, interacting and interfering with military devices, being able to shut down nuclear missiles at the Minuteman sites. That is absolutely one of the biggest stories of all time, and Robert Salas and I and a few others have dealt with it, but you would think that all of these public statements from people like Robert Salas and reporters would be a leverage point. That just Bob's book alone, the first one having to do with his own firsthand experiences at Malmstrom Air Force Base, you would think it would leverage open the entire world. That they would say, "Oh, okay, King's X. Now we now have to admit," and it doesn't happen. It's as if the subject has been so successfully marginalized by counterintelligence that got us through World War II. These guys are smart. They are really bright minds. And when they're given an assignment, you turn a landed silver disc with bodies between Roswell and Corona into a weather balloon. That is your order.
Yeah, we'll fall for it.
yeah, exactly.
And those guys do it, and 99.5% of the public and the media accept it, go on the next day, no questions, and governments, military, intel, and counter-intel count on the short attention span of humans.
Well, it's succeeded pretty much. I mean, except for the people like yourself and people
us abnormal people,
right,
that love this stuff.
Yeah.
And because of time, we're going to have to ask you back again, and where we talk about the bent waters phenomenon.
Oh yeah, because that's another.
I know but this is. I mean, that's a fascinating a story that's like you said, it's still going on to this day, and. But we have about 5 to 6 minutes left, and let's talk about Earthfiles. So people that don't know about it can go to earthfiles.com and find out all kinds of subjects and products and news
videos
and videos.
They can fall in love with you there.
Yeah, talk about Earthfiles a little bit.
Thank you very much for asking, because Earthfiles has been a labor of love for me since 1999. I had this hope that I could sort of build a digital crossroads. That's what I say in the about at the website, where people from all walks of life could come and report to me high strangeness or environmental or science or medical breakthroughs. I'm still in that beat. But when it came to high strangeness, that I could have a crossroads of honest sharing and myself reporting as many facts as possible that are not on the 6 o'clock news.
Yep.
That's been my goal. And between 1999 and 2015, Earthfiles now has about 3,000 in-depth reports that represent about 50,000 images and maps and documents and illustrations. I use Earthfiles.com as both an Encyclopedia Britannica of constant reference for myself and being able to give historic context to new stories that I'm reporting that are just like what happened 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But it is also breaking news. I am trying all of the time, every day and every week. I am trying not for the numbers of stories, but that what I do feature at earthfiles.com, I think is the most important piece at the time that I can contribute with firsthand in-depth interviews, photographs, documents, illustrations, and whether it is in Real X-Files, which I focus on as well, and the Real X-Files can range from even Sasquatch, UFOs, areas that I call high strangeness on this planet, and which my suspicion is that most of them have some sort of connection. And then breakthroughs in medicine and breakthroughs in science that are changing this planet so rapidly. And in doing Earthfiles, instead of concentrating on advertising and the irritating, what do they call them, clicks for pay or pay for clicks
Right.
and all
Yeah,
of that
pay-per-click,
side
yeah.
of
Advertising.
I said to myself, whoever it is that comes to Earthfiles, my goal, I hope, is that they will recognize that I am a professional investigative reporter who is trying to take all of these subjects seriously and apply as many facts and firsthand testimonies as I can get, which is very difficult in this field. And that if people recognize that there's nothing about all of Earthfiles that is ever going over the top, I'm not there to do a sensational thing. I only do subscriptions.
Oh,
And that
okay.
the subscriptions have helped me keep Earthfiles going, and it means that people who do pay a subscription, when I post, which right now I have an extremely important, brand new half-cat mutilation, which is part of the phenomena.
Oh, wow.
It's a very
Half-cat.
eerie, when you read the entire story about what happened in Wheat Ridge, which is in Denver, and how many cycles of bloodless half-cats, where the front half is usually left looking like a hand puppet with no blood.
Oh.
These are amazing, and I'm not trying to disturb anyone. I'm trying to say this is part of the world around us that is never reported on the 6 o'clock news, and yet, in the context of everything that we've talked about today, could be an extremely important piece that everybody should know about, because my fundamental, I guess, if you said, do I have a bottom line about my work, my professional life, and Earthfiles.com, the title is reporter who is filing news about the Earth. It is only with knowledge in my life hitting all of these subjects. It's the knowledge that strengthens me. I don't feel fear. I want to know, I want to understand exactly everything that the government knows, and I think that you, your audience, this entire planet of 7.2 billion, I think every human deserves to know what people in governments
Amen
and
to
military know about other life forms using this planet, and I do not think that it is necessarily a scary situation. I am coming to the conclusion that we are dealing with something that also has survival problems, and that if we knew the truth throughout this huge, vast universe, we would know, no matter how advanced technologies took organic life, that organic life always has challenges of surviving in this universe. And if we all knew that, then maybe out of truth, we would realize that it is in recognizing, knowing about other life in the universe, that we on this planet, with all of our difficulties and penchants for war and violence, might become more peaceful, and we might stop destroying ourselves, and we might begin to live on a planet where everybody was pulling for everybody else.
Yeah.
That would be peace on Earth.
Well, I think that is a great place to say,
We love
please,
you.
we love
Yes,
you,
we
and
love
please
you.
come back, because we have so much more to talk about, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. And I can see why so many people for so many years have fell in love with you and love to hear what you have to say, because the knowledge and the passion that you have just is overwhelming in a great way. So,
Well, thank you for having me on, and thank you for sharing your own subjects with audiences that are not exposed to this on the 6 o'clock news often.
amen to that.
Wow.
Linda Moulton Howe, everybody. Linda, thank you so much, and please come back,
you.
and we'll be in touch. And
God, God bless.
God bless you
Bye-bye.
too.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
All right, gentlemen and ladies, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we have another great guest for you. We're going to talk about pre-births, not just afterlife, but the pre-birth,
And not just past life,
and not just past life,
but pre-birth.
yes,
And where you go in between that.
in between. So this is going to be very fascinating. So we don't want you guys to go anywhere. We're going to be right back. We're going to take just a little break. So enjoy a little bit of music. And enjoy. Truth be told, I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor.
I'm Rachel Lang.
Be right back.